It was the kind of Christmas Eve that belonged on a postcard, heavy snow falling in thick, silent flakes, coating the world in pristine white. But the only thing painted red on this canvas was the blood dripping onto the lace of a wedding dress. The radio was still playing, Silent Night, the holy hymn distorted by the hiss of a crushed radiator. One moment, Leah Hale had been speeding down the icy mountain road, blinding tears blurring her vision. The next, the world had spun violently, ending in the deafening crunch of metal wrapping around an ancient pine tree. Leah gasped, the air seized from her lungs by the seatbelt. Her head rested against the steering wheel, her vision swimming. The cold was instant, biting through the shattered windshield, turning her tears to ice on her cheeks. She tried to move, to unclasp her seatbelt, but her hands felt like heavy stones. She was going to die here. She was going to freeze to death in a $20,000 Vera Wang gown, 2 days before Christmas, and the saddest part was that she wasn't sure she even cared. Then, a shadow blocked out the moonlight. A figure loomed outside the wreckage, tall, broad, and terrifying. He wore a long black wool coat that whipped around his legs in the storm. He didn't look like a savior, he looked like the Grim Reaper coming to collect. He wrenched the driver's side door open with a metallic groan of protest, the steel bending under his grip as if it were cardboard. Leah flinched, shrinking back as a pair of dark, dangerous eyes met hers. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't offer a comforting smile. He just reached in, his leather-gloved hands gripping her arms with a firmness that was efficient, bordering on rough. "We have to move," he said. His voice was a low rumble, deep and gravelly, cutting through the wind. "Now." Before Leah could find her voice, a sharp crack echoed through the forest, a sound distinct from the snapping branches. A gunshot. The man didn't flinch. He just pulled her from the wreckage of her life and into the freezing night, shielding her body with his own as snow kicked up around them. To understand why an heiress was bleeding in a snowbank in the Catskill Mountains instead of dancing at her reception, you have to rewind 3 hours. You have to go back to the warmth. Back to the lie. The Plaza Hotel in New York City smelled of cinnamon, expensive perfume, and betrayal. The ballroom was ready, decked out in gold and ivory, with hundreds of guests waiting for the wedding of the season. Leah stood in the bridal suite, staring at her reflection. She looked perfect. The dress was a dream, the diamond earrings were a gift from her father, and her hair was pinned up in an intricate chignon. She should have been happy. Daniel was the perfect fiancé, handsome, ambitious, approved by her family. But then her phone had buzzed. "Come to the East Wing suite. Don't let anyone see you." It was a text from Daniel. Her stomach had tightened, an instinctual warning she tried to ignore. She gathered her heavy skirts and slipped out, navigating the service corridors to avoid being seen by the bridesmaids. When she reached the suite, the door was ajar. She pushed it open, a smile ready on her lips to comfort whatever pre-wedding jitters he was having. The smile died instantly. Daniel wasn't pacing nervously. He was pouring a scotch, looking annoyed. And sitting on the velvet sofa, weeping into a tissue, was Chloe. Leah's younger sister. The air in the room felt sucked out. Daniel turned, his face devoid of the charm he usually wore like a mask. He looked at Leah with a cold, detached pity that was worse than hatred. "Leah," he said, taking a sip of the amber liquid. "We can't do this. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes, Daniel," Leah whispered, her hands trembling. "What is going on? Why is Chloe crying?" Chloe looked up, her mascara running, her eyes filled with a guilt so profound it made Leah nauseous. "I'm so sorry, Leah. We tried to stop. We didn't mean for this to happen." "Stop what?" Leah's voice cracked. "We're in love," Daniel stated flatly, as if commenting on the weather. He walked over to Chloe, placing a protective hand on her shoulder, a gesture he used to use with Leah. "And Chloe is pregnant." The world tilted on its axis. Pregnant. Her sister. Her fiancé. The two people she loved most in the world had been carving a hollow space in her back while smiling to her face. Leah looked at the man she was about to pledge her life to. She saw the calculation in his eyes. He didn't love Chloe, he loved that Chloe was their father's favorite. He was securing his bag, regardless of which sister he had to destroy to get it. "You're a monster," Leah breathed. "I'm a realist," Daniel countered, checking his watch. "Calling it off now is cleaner. Your father will understand. Eventually." Leah didn't scream. She didn't fight. She felt small, invisible, just like she had felt her entire life in her family's shadow. She turned and ran. She ran through the corridors, ignored the shouts, burst out into the valet stand, and demanded her car. She drove without a destination, just needing to put miles between her and the humiliation. She drove until the city lights faded, until the snow started, until her tears blinded her, leading her straight into that patch of black ice. Back in the forest, the cold reality of the present snapped Leah back to attention. The stranger was dragging her through knee-deep snow, his grip iron-tight. "Can you walk?" he growled, glancing over his shoulder. He wasn't looking at her, he was scanning the tree lean, his body coiled with tension. I think so," Leah stammered, her teeth chattering so hard it hurt. Who are you?" "Save your breath," he ordered. Another shot rang out, this one hitting a birch tree just inches to their left, sending a shower of wood splinters raining down on them. Leah screamed, stumbling. The man cursed, a sharp, violent Italian word. He realized she was slowing him down. Without breaking stride, he swept her up into his arms, carrying her bridal style as if she weighed nothing more than a snowflake. He ran with terrifying speed, his boots crunching heavily, his breath pluming in the air. Leah buried her face in the rough wool of his coat. He smelled of gunpowder, pine, and something metallic, like blood. He didn't smell like the expensive cologne Daniel wore. He smelled like danger. They reached a black SUV hidden behind a dense thicket of evergreens. It was parked tactically, facing the exit. He yanked the back door open and practically threw her onto the leather seats before diving into the front. The engine roared to life with a feral growl. "Get down," he shouted, throwing the car into gear. Leah scrambled to the floor of the back seat, covering her head with her arms. The tires spun, catching gravel and ice, and the car fishtailed violently before finding traction. As they sped away, Leah heard the thud-thud of bullets hitting the trunk. They swerved onto the main road, the speedometer climbing. The man drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding a gun that he placed on the center console. He checked the rearview mirror constantly, his eyes narrowing in the dim light of the dashboard. Leah slowly pulled herself up onto the seat, shivering uncontrollably. The heater was blasting, but she couldn't feel it yet. She looked at the man who had just saved her life. In the glow of the dashboard lights, she saw him clearly for the first time. He was devastatingly handsome, but in a way that made your instincts scream run. He had a sharp, angular jaw covered in dark stubble, a straight nose that looked like it had been broken once, and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His eyes were the color of espresso, dark and unreadable, focused entirely on survival. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a ranger. He was something else entirely. "Are you hit?" he asked, his eyes flickering to her in the mirror for a split second. I don't think so," Leah touched her forehead. It was still bleeding, but the flow had slowed. "Who were those people? Why were they shooting at us?" "They weren't shooting at us," he corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. "They were shooting at me. You just happened to crash your car in the middle of an ambush." He took a sharp turn onto a logging road, the SUV bouncing over the ruts. The trees closed in around them, a tunnel of white and black. "My name is Matteo," he said, the name rolling off his tongue with a heavy, rhythmic cadence. "And if you want to live to see Christmas morning, Principessa, you're going to have to stop asking questions and start listening." Leah looked at the gun on the console, then at the blood on her dress. She had run away from a heartbreak only to land in the middle of a war zone. She watched the back of his head, the way the muscles in his neck were tight with tension. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But as the car ate up the miles, taking them deeper into the wilderness and away from the civilization she knew, a strange realization settled in her chest. For the first time all day, with this dangerous stranger, she didn't feel invisible. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. Matteo didn't answer immediately. He watched the snowy road, his mind calculating routes, fuel, and enemies. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower, almost regretting what he had to do. "Nowhere anyone can find us." The silence inside the SUV was heavier than the storm raging outside. For an hour, the only sounds were the rhythmic thwack-thwack of the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the snow and the low hum of the heater. They had left the paved roads miles ago, climbing higher into the Catskills on a track that was barely a deer trail. Leah sat frozen in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped around herself. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She stole a glance at Matteo. His profile was etched in stone, illuminated only by the dashboard lights. He drove with a terrifying competence, navigating the treacherous ice without a flinch. His left hand rested on the steering wheel, his right hand hovered near the center console, close to the gun. "Where are we?" she whispered, her voice cracking. The darkness outside was total. No streetlights. No houses. Just endless, suffocating forest. "My safe house," Matteo replied, his eyes never leaving the narrow path ahead. "It's off the grid. No GPS, no digital footprint. If they tracked my car, the trail ends at the highway turnoff." "Who are they?" Leah asked again. Matteo tightened his jaw. "People who don't believe in the holiday spirit." The SUV lurched as it crested a ridge, and suddenly, the headlights swept over a structure nestled in a dense cluster of pines. It was a cabin, built from dark, rough-hewn timber, looking less like a vacation home and more like a fortress buried in the snow. Matteo killed the engine. The sudden absence of noise was jarring. The wind howled around the vehicle, shaking the frame. "Stay here," he commanded. He stepped out into the blizzard, his movements sharp and tactical. He scanned the perimeter, gun drawn, checking the snow for tracks that weren't theirs. Satisfied, he circled back to her door and yanked it open. "Let's go. Fast." Leah stumbled out, her heels sinking deep into the powder. The cold was a physical blow, instantly numbing her exposed skin. Her wedding dress, wet and heavy, dragged like a lead weight. She slipped, crying out, but Matteo was there instantly. He didn't just steady her, he scooped her up again, carrying her through the drifts toward the heavy oak door. He kicked the door shut behind them and threw 3 separate deadbolts. The cabin was freezing, the air inside stale and frigid. It smelled of sawdust and old wood smoke. Matteo set her down on a dusty leather sofa and immediately went to work. He didn't take off his coat. He moved to the windows, securing heavy wooden shutters that blocked out the storm and the view. Leah sat shivering, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. She watched him move. He was a weapon in human form, efficient, lethal, and completely terrifying. But he was also the only thing standing between her and the cold. "You're freezing," Matteo said. It wasn't a question. He knelt by the massive stone fireplace, stacking kindling and logs with practiced hands. A match flared, the smell of sulfur brief and sharp, and within moments, a fire was crackling, casting dancing shadows against the log walls. He turned to her then, and for the first time, he really looked at her. He took in the ruined designer dress, the blood drying on her temple, the tear tracks cutting through her makeup. His expression softened, just a fraction. "I need to look at that head wound," he said, pulling a tactical first aid kit from his coat pocket. He dragged a heavy wooden chair over and sat in front of her, his knees brushing against the silk of her gown. "I'm fine," Leah whispered, leaning back. It's just a scratch. Leah, he said, saying her name for the first time. It sounded intimate, heavy on his tongue. Hold still. He reached out, and she flinched. He paused, his hand hovering in the air. I'm not going to hurt you, he said quietly. I promise. She looked into his eyes, dark espresso swirling with something that looked like regret. Slowly, she nodded. His hands were rough, calloused from hard work and violence, but his touch was shockingly gentle. He cleaned the cut on her temple with an antiseptic wipe. It stung, and she hissed in a breath, gripping the edge of the sofa. Sorry, he murmured. Almost done. He placed a butterfly bandage over the cut, his fingers lingering for a second too long on her cheek. The heat of his skin was a stark contrast to the cold room. For a heartbeat, the air between them felt charged, electric. Then he pulled back, the professional mask sliding back into place. You can't stay in that dress, he said, standing up. It's wet, and you're going into hypothermia. I don't have women's clothes, but I have clean wool. He went to a duffel bag in the corner and tossed her a thick gray sweater and a pair of heavy socks. Change. I'll turn around. Leah stood on shaky legs. Her fingers fumbled with the delicate buttons on the back of the gown. She couldn't do it. Her hands were too numb, and the intricate bridal fashion wasn't designed to be removed alone. I can't, she admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. The buttons. Matteo stiffened. He stood with his back to her, staring into the fire. Come here. She stepped closer, the silk rustling softly. He turned her around gently. She felt his warm breath on the back of her neck as his large fingers deftly worked the tiny pearl buttons. He didn't touch her skin, not once, but the proximity was overwhelming. She could feel the heat radiating off him, a solid wall of protection. There, he said, his voice rough. He stepped away quickly, giving her space. Leah retreated to the small bathroom, peeling off the ruined symbol of her betrayal. She pulled on his sweater. It was massive, hanging to her mid-thighs, smelling of him, cedar and rain. She pulled on the socks and walked back out. Matteo was standing by the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. He had a small transistor radio in his hand. Static filled the room, broken by a crackly voice. Police are searching for suspects involved in a gangland shootout on Route 9. Sources say Matteo Romano, underboss of the Romano crime family, is believed to be wounded and on the run. Leah froze. The name hit her like a physical slap. Romano. Everyone in New York knew that name. They were the shadows in the city, the whispers in the boardrooms. They were the mafia. Matteo clicked the radio off. The silence that followed was suffocating. He turned to face her, his face devoid of apology. You knew, she whispered, backing away until her legs hit the sofa. You're him. The underboss. I told you I wasn't the police, Matteo said evenly. You're a criminal, she breathed, panic rising in her chest again. A killer. I'm a soldier, he corrected, his eyes hard. And right now, I'm the only reason you aren't bleeding out in a ditch. I want to go, Leah said, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. She looked at the door. I can't be here. If they find you, if the police come. The police aren't coming, Leah. The men who shot at us. They own half the precinct. If you walk out that door, you die. If you stay here, you survive. I'd rather take my chances, she snapped. The trauma of the day, Daniel, Chloe, the crash, boiled over into a reckless need for control. She lunged for the door, throwing the bolts back. Don't be an idiot, Matteo growled, moving to intercept her. She yanked the door open. The wind hit her like a hammer. The storm had intensified into a whiteout. You couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. The snow was blowing horizontally, a wall of ice. The temperature dropped instantly, stealing the breath from her lungs. She took one step onto the porch and nearly was blown over. A hand grabbed the back of the sweater, hauling her back inside with effortless strength. Matteo slammed the door shut and engaged the locks again. He spun her around, gripping her shoulders. "Look at me," he shouted, shaking her slightly. "Look outside. That isn't a winter wonderland. That is death. You wouldn't make it to the main road." Leah looked up at him, her chest heaving, tears spilling over again. "Why do you care? I'm just baggage to you. I saw your face when you pulled me out of the car. You didn't want to save me." "You're right. I didn't," Matteo admitted, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. His grip on her shoulders loosened, his thumbs brushing her collarbone through the wool. "I should have left you. It would have been smarter. Safer." "Then why didn't you?" she challenged, her eyes searching his. Matteo looked down at her. He looked at the oversized sweater engulfing her small frame, the fierce defiance in her tear-filled eyes. He looked like a man at war with himself. "Because," he said, the word hanging in the air. "Because I saw the way you were looking at the road before the crash. You weren't driving to get somewhere, Leah. You were driving to get away. And I know exactly what that feels like." He let her go and stepped back, retreating into his own shadows. "The storm is settling in," he said, his voice flat again. "We're snowed in. Nobody gets in, nobody gets out. Not until the plow comes through, and out here. That won't be until after Christmas." Leah wrapped her arms around herself, the reality sinking in. She was trapped. Trapped in a cabin with a mafia boss, miles from civilization, while the world celebrated peace on earth. She looked at Matteo, who was now checking his gun, methodically unloading and reloading the magazine. "Get some sleep," he said without looking up. "I'll take the first watch." Leah curled up on the sofa, pulling a heavy quilt over herself. She watched him from beneath her lashes. He sat in a chair by the door, a sentinel in the dark. The firelight danced across his scars. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But as she drifted into an exhausted sleep, the last thing she thought of wasn't Daniel's betrayal. It was the way Matteo's hands had trembled, just slightly, when he buttoned her dress. The monster had a heartbeat. And for the next 48 hours, her life depended on it. The next morning broke with a deceptive stillness. The blizzard had exhausted itself, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of sparkling diamond dust. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the shutters, painting stripes across the wooden floor. Leah woke to the smell of wood smoke and coffee. She sat up, the heavy wool blanket slipping off her shoulders. For a moment, she forgot. She expected the silk sheets of the plaza. Then she saw the log walls, the gun on the mantelpiece, and the man standing by the stove. Matteo had his back to her. He was shirtless. Leah's breath hitched. His back was a map of violence, a tapestry of old scars, knife wounds, and burns that told a story of a life lived in the shadows. He moved with a fluid grace, pouring dark liquid into 2 tin mugs. He turned, catching her staring. He didn't cover up. He didn't apologize. He just walked over and held out a mug. "Instant," he said, his voice raspy with sleep. "It's not what you're used to, Principessa, but the caffeine works." Leah took the mug, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Thank you." She took a sip. It was bitter and strong, but it warmed her chest. "Did you sleep?" "Soldiers don't sleep," Matteo said, pulling a flannel shirt on, concealing the scars. "We wait." He walked to the window, peering through the slats. The storm cleared. The plows will be out on the main roads by noon. But up here, we're still ghosts. Leah stood up, wrapping the oversized sweater tighter around her. The fear from last night had dulled, replaced by a strange, intimate tension. They were alone at the end of the world. Why do you call me that? She asked. Principessa. Matteo looked at her, his dark eyes softening. Because you look like one. Even in a stolen sweater in a shack, you look like you belong in a castle. And I belong in the moat, fighting off the dragons. He moved to the door. I need to chop wood. Stay inside. Leah watched him go. She couldn't just sit there. Not anymore. She found a can of soup in the cupboard and heated it up. When Matteo came back an hour later, smelling of fresh pine and sweat, she had lunch ready. They ate in silence by the fire, but it wasn't the awkward silence of strangers. It was comfortable. Why did you run? Matteo asked suddenly, putting his bowl down. Yesterday. You were driving like you wanted to crash. Leah looked into the fire. My fiancé. Daniel. He was sleeping with my sister. She's pregnant. Matteo went still. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He betrayed you. On your wedding day. He told me it was cleaner this way. Leah let out a dry, bitter laugh. I spent my whole life trying to be perfect for him. For my father. And in the end, I was just replaceable. Matteo reached out, his hand covering hers on the rough table. His palm was calloused, warm, and grounding. You aren't replaceable, Leah, he said, his voice fierce. A man who throws away a diamond because he prefers glass is a fool. If you were mine. He stopped, catching himself. He pulled his hand back, the air between them suddenly thick with unspoken desire. If I was yours. Leah whispered, her heart pounding. Matteo stood up abruptly, pacing to the fireplace. I don't get to have things like you, Leah. I have enemies. I have a price on my head. I have a brother who died in my arms because of this life. I'm trying to get out. That's why I was on that road. I was leaving the family. But the life, it claws you back. You were leaving. I want peace, he admitted, looking at her. I want a life where I don't have to check the perimeter every hour. But I'm not sure I deserve it. Maybe. Leah stood up, walking to him. She reached out, her hand hovering over the scar on his chest, right over his heart. Maybe you just need someone to help you believe you do. They stood inches apart, the magnetic pull undeniable. Matteo leaned in, his eyes searching hers, his breath hitching. Leah tilted her head up, her lips parting. Crunch. The sound of tires crushing snow outside shattered the moment like glass. Matteo changed instantly. The vulnerability vanished. The soldier returned. He pushed Leah behind him, drawing his gun in one fluid motion. Get down, he hissed. Behind the couch. Now. Leah scrambled behind the heavy leather sofa, her heart hammering against her ribs. Matteo moved to the side of the window, peering out. One car, he muttered. Not tactical. A civilian SUV. A heavy fist pounded on the door. Leah. A voice muffled by the wood shouted. I know you're in there. I saw the car tracks. Leah gasped. She knew that voice. It wasn't a hitman. It's Daniel, she whispered, horror washing over her. Matteo looked at her, confusion warring with rage. The fiancé. Open the door, Leah. Daniel shouted, sounding desperate and angry. I need the car. I need the money in the glove box. I'm in trouble. Matteo holstered his gun at the small of his back, but he didn't relax. He walked to the door and threw the bolt. He yanked it open. Daniel stood there, looking nothing like the polished groom from yesterday. He was disheveled, wearing a coat that was too thin, his face pale and sweaty. He tried to push past Matteo, but he might as well have tried to push a mountain. Who the hell are you? Daniel sneered, looking Matteo up and down. Then he saw Leah peeking out from behind the sofa. Leah. Thank God. Give me the keys. Now. How did you find me? Leah stood up, her shock turning into anger. I tracked the car's GPS on my phone, Daniel snapped, stepping into the room uninvited. Look, I don't have time for your drama. I owe some bad people a lot of money, Leah. I was counting on your dowry to pay them off. Since the wedding is off, they're coming for me. I need the cash you keep in the emergency kit. Leah stared at him. You didn't come to apologize. You came to rob me. I came to survive. Daniel yelled, grabbing Leah's arm. Give me the keys. Let her go. Matteo's voice was a low growl, vibrating with menace. Daniel laughed, a nervous, arrogant sound. Or what? You're just some lumberjack she picked up to make me jealous. Back off, pal. This is family business. Daniel shoved Leah backward. She stumbled, hitting the wall. That was the mistake. Matteo moved. It was a blur of motion. He didn't punch Daniel, he dismantled him. He grabbed Daniel's wrist, twisting it until Daniel screamed and dropped to his knees. Matteo slammed him against the wall, his forearm pressing against Daniel's windpipe. You touch her again, Matteo whispered into Daniel's ear, and they won't find your body until the spring thaw. Daniel gasped for air, his eyes bulging with terror. He realized, too late, that he wasn't dealing with a lumberjack. He was dealing with a predator. Get out, Matteo ordered, releasing him. Daniel fell to the floor, coughing. He looked at Matteo, then at Leah. His fear turned into something spiteful. You think he's a hero, Leah? Daniel spat, scrambling toward the door. I saw the news. I know who he is. You're shacking up with a mobster. Wait until your father hears about this. Go. Matteo roared. Daniel scrambled out the door, slipping on the ice, and ran toward his car. Leah stood trembling against the wall. Matteo turned to her, his chest heaving. The rage in his eyes was terrifying, but when he looked at her, it crumbled. Did he hurt you? He asked, stepping closer, reaching out to check her arm. No, Leah whispered. She looked at the door. Matteo, he said he owes money to bad people. If he tracked the car. Matteo froze. The realization hit them both at the same time. If Daniel could track the car's GPS. The sound of Daniel's engine starting was cut short by a deafening explosion. Boom. The ground shook. A fireball erupted outside the window, turning the snow orange. Leah screamed, covering her ears. Matteo tackled her to the floor, covering her body with his. Stay down. Glass shattered as a hail of automatic gunfire tore through the cabin walls. Splinters of wood flew like shrapnel. He led them right to us, Matteo growled, crawling toward his duffel bag. He pulled out an assault rifle and tossed a smaller handgun to Leah. Do you know how to use this? He shouted over the noise of the gunfire. Leah stared at the cold metal in her hands, shaking her head. No. Point and pull, Matteo said, his eyes locking onto hers. Stay low. Don't shoot unless they come through that door. He kissed her forehead, hard, desperate, a goodbye and a promise all in one. I'm going to draw their fire. You stay here. No. Leah grabbed his arm. Don't go out there. There's too many of them. It's the only way, Matteo said. He looked at her, and for a second, the soldier was gone. Just the man remained. I told you, Leah. I'd burn the world down to keep you safe. He kicked the back door open and sprinted out into the smoke and snow, his rifle roaring as he engaged the enemy. Leah was left alone in the ruined cabin, the sound of war raging outside. She gripped the gun, her knuckles white. She wasn't the runaway bride anymore. She was the woman who loved the monster. And she wasn't going to let him die alone. She crawled toward the window. Through the smoke, she saw dark figures moving in the tree line. They were flanking him. Matteo was pinned down behind a stack of logs, taking fire from two sides. He was good, but he was outnumbered. One of the assassins was creeping up on his blind spot, a shotgun raised. Leah didn't think. She didn't breathe. She raised the gun, resting it on the windowsill. She aimed at the shadow creeping toward Matteo. "Point and pull," she whispered. She pulled the trigger. The pistol kicked in Leah's hand like a living thing, the recoil jarring her shoulder. She didn't see where the bullet went, but she saw the result. The assassin creeping up on Matteo's flank flinched, ducking as wood chips from the window frame exploded near his face. It was a distraction. It was a mistake. And it was enough. Matteo didn't hesitate. He didn't look back to see who had fired. He used that split second of confusion to spin around, his rifle raised. Two sharp cracks echoed through the valley, louder than the wind. The assassin dropped into the snow, a dark stain spreading instantly on the white powder. The remaining attacker, realizing he was the last man standing against a ghost and a woman with a gun, broke cover and ran toward the trees. Matteo raised his rifle to take the shot, but suddenly his leg buckled. He stumbled, catching himself on a stack of firewood, clutching his left shoulder. "Matteo!" Leah screamed, dropping the gun and scrambling toward the broken door. "Stay back," he roared, but the command lacked its usual force. Leah ignored him. She ran out into the freezing cold, her socks soaking instantly in the snow. Matteo was slumped against the woodpile, his face pale, blood seeping through his fingers where he gripped his shoulder. "You idiot," he wheezed, looking up at her with eyes that were wild with adrenaline and terror. "You could have been killed." "So could you," Leah countered, her voice shaking. She grabbed his good arm, hauling him up. "Get inside. Now." He leaned heavily on her, his size dwarfing hers, but she didn't buckle. They stumbled back into the ruined cabin, leaving a trail of red in the snow. Leah kicked the door shut, though with the lock shot out, it wouldn't stop anyone. She guided him to the rug in front of the dying fire. "The kit," Matteo gritted out through clenched teeth. "In the bag." Leah grabbed the tactical first aid kit. Her hands were covered in his blood, but she didn't faint. She didn't panic. She ripped open a packet of clotting gauze. "This is going to hurt," she said, echoing his words from the night before. Matteo looked at her, a pained, bloody smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Do your worst, Principessa." She pressed the gauze into the wound. Matteo threw his head back and let out a guttural groan, his body arching off the floor. Leah held firm, tears stinging her eyes, but she didn't stop until the bleeding slowed. She wrapped his shoulder tight, her movements efficient, born of necessity. As she tied the final knot, headlights swept across the broken window again. Leah froze. "Are there more?" Matteo listened. The sound of engines was different this time. Heavier. More of them. He slumped back against the sofa, letting out a long, ragged breath. "No," he whispered. "That's the cavalry." The door was pushed open, and 3 men in heavy tactical gear stormed in. They weren't police. They moved with the same lethal precision as Matteo. When they saw him bleeding on the floor, they lowered their weapons. "Boss," the lead man said, rushing over. "We saw the explosion. We got here as fast as the plows would let us." "The perimeter?" Matteo asked, his voice weak. "Clear. We got the runner in the woods." "And?" The man paused, looking at Leah, then back to Matteo. "We found a civilian in the driveway. Burned, but alive. Says his name is Daniel." Leah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "Hand him over to the authorities," Matteo ordered, his eyes closing. "Anonymously. With the evidence of his deaths. Let the law bury him." "And the bodies?" Clean it up. All of it. By sunrise, I want this place to look like nothing happened. The men moved to work. One of them helped Matteo stand, offering to take him to the car. Matteo shook him off. He turned to Leah. She was standing by the fireplace, hugging her arms, looking at the chaos that had invaded their sanctuary. Take her to the city, Matteo said to his driver, his voice devoid of emotion. Drop her at the police station. She's a victim of a carjacking. She knows nothing about this. Leah whipped her head around. What? Matteo wouldn't look at her. Go, Leah. It's over. You're sending me away. She stepped closer, ignoring the armed men watching them. After everything? Look around you. Matteo shouted, the effort making him wince. He gestured to the bullet holes in the walls, the blood on the floor. This is my life, Leah. It's not a fairy tale. It's blood and snow and bullets. You don't belong here. You belong in your penthouse with your safe, clean life. My safe, clean life was a lie. Leah shouted back, poking him in the chest. My fiancé sold me out. My sister betrayed me. The only time I've felt safe, the only time I've felt real, was in this cabin with you. The room went silent. The soldiers looked at the floor, suddenly finding their boots very interesting. Matteo looked down at her. The anger drained out of him, leaving only exhaustion and a raw, aching longing. He reached out with his good hand, cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed away a smudge of soot. I am a dangerous man, Leah, he whispered. I will never be safe. I don't want safe, Leah said, her voice steady, her eyes locking onto his. I want you. Matteo stared at her for a long moment. He looked for fear, for hesitation. He found none. He found only the steel spine of a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side. Give us a minute, Matteo ordered his men. The soldiers filed out, closing the broken door as best they could. Alone in the wreckage, Matteo stepped closer. You realize if you stay, there is no going back. You become part of this. Part of me. I was running away with no destination, Leah said softly. I think I finally found where I'm supposed to be. Matteo let out a breath that sounded like a surrender. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, fueled by adrenaline and survival and a love that had bloomed in the most hostile soil imaginable. Leah held on to him, careful of his wound, anchoring him as he anchored her. The sun rose over the Catskills, turning the blood-stained snow into a blinding sheet of gold. The black SUVs were a convoy winding down the mountain road. In the back of the lead car, Matteo sat with his arm in a sling. Leah was asleep against his good shoulder, her hand resting protectively on his chest. They passed the spot where her car had crashed, now just an empty space where the cleaners had already done their work. It was as if the snowflake bride had never existed. The woman sleeping beside him was someone new. Someone stronger. Matteo looked out the window. They passed a small town, the Christmas lights still twinkling in the early morning dawn. A family was walking out of a church, kids were pulling sleds. It was the normal world. A world he had watched from the shadows his entire life. He looked down at Leah. She stirred, her lashes fluttering open. She looked at him, a sleepy smile spreading across her face. Where are we? She murmured. Heading home, Matteo said. My home. Leah sat up, looking out at the passing snow. Is it Christmas? Yeah, Matteo said. He reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out something small and shiny. It wasn't a ring, it was too soon for that. It was a single, perfect silver bullet casing from the fight. He had picked it up off the floor before they left. He pressed it into her hand. A memento of survival. A promise of protection. Merry Christmas, Leah. Leah closed her fingers around the cold metal, feeling the warmth of his hand over hers. She looked at the scars on his knuckles, then up into his dark eyes that were finally, for the first time, at peace. "Merry Christmas, Matteo," she whispered. She leaned her head back on his shoulder as the car sped toward the city, toward the danger, and toward a future that was uncertain, dangerous, and absolutely perfect.